This guy is thinking, so you should be thinking too. What is this class about? He's really questioning it. For this kind of shorter class, our intention is to teach you a little bit about mythologies and how to write specific stories and understand myths. And we've broken it down into a few different categories. Who knows if we'll get to all of them, but this week is supposed to be kind of an intro. Week 2, we're going to be learning a little bit about creation/end myths, learning about different pantheons of or gods on week 3. Week 4, we're going to be doing some hero story stuff. Week 5, we're going to do some more brainstorming and possibly even using some ideas that we've come up with along the way. And week 6, we're going to be reviewing and sharing some of our stories because we're probably going to have written a story at least by then. So, boop, next slide. As you can see, you're going to want to feel really cool once you're going to feel really cool once you read today's plan.
We're going to learn what a myth is, what makes it different from other forms of writing and why we have them. And we'll look at some examples of how myths are used to explain things. We'll be looking at some different mythologies and some of their famous myths, mainly Greek, Norse, and Egyptian, the kind of big 3 mythologies. And we'll also have you guys start to brainstorming some of your own myth ideas.
Okay, here, wait. I gotta click to the next slide. Boop.
Okay, there.
You're gonna be thinking like this big, smart chimp. Okay. Whose turn is it now? I think it's Fred's.
Yeah, I think that's me. What is a myth? There may be a lot of things that come to mind when you think of myths. They can trigger thoughts of ancient society and monarchies with grand empires, or we may think of the constant struggle between the gods and their own creations. What do you think when you think of a myth?
Yeah, students, what do you think?
What makes a myth? Okay, there are a lot of things that make a myth or separate from other stories.
Separate it. Okay.
Okay, whatever. But there's one big difference nearly all myths boil down to. A myth is a falsehood, but ancient myths are stories from religions that as they've died have become falsehoods and then myths. The structure most myths follow through is the more important part. And between heroes and gods, they have a plot that concludes with an explanation for something ancient societies weren't able to figure out, whether something we know now, the cause of now, like tides or lightning, or something philosophical, like what happens after death or where we came from. It's also important to realize that we can write our own myths today. Ancient myths were based off belief. And these people took myths as fact and took it to show them how to act and think, much like a modern-day Bible or Torah.
Examples. Greek, the story of Persephone and the seasons. For Norse and Chinese, there's stories about eclipses. They're also philosophical.
Wait, that's mine. That's me. I can explain the eclipses. Sorry, I just wanted to talk a little bit about this. It's really interesting. So for eclipses, there's a lot of different beliefs around what caused eclipses. Ancient Chinese, where the dragons would eat the moon. There's a lot of eating stories. The Norse actually thought that they were going to get the moon and sun were going to get eaten by wolves. In Hinduism, they believe that one day all the gods and demons worked together to make an elixir that would give somebody immortality. And this one demon named Rahu really wanted the elixir, and so he broke into the banquet where they were making it and tried to drink it. And basically the sun and moon god called the kind of king god of Hinduism named Vishnu. And Vishnu ordered Rahu's head to be cut off. And so real quickly they cut off his head, but because he had drank some of the elixir, his head was immortal, but the rest of his body wasn't. So his head still lives on. And Rahu got really mad at the sun and moon gods, and so he chased them around the planet until he can finally eat them. But eclipses are not permanent because Rahu doesn't have any arms and he can't grab onto them. So that's eclipses. That's an example of myths trying to explain things. Apologies for talking so much about it. I think it's interesting.
Okay, Norse, the warriors, and Valhalla, Buddhism, Nirvana. Not gonna get into all of them yet. We can get into them later. We have like a lot of days of this. Don't worry about it. Blink. Video example.
Nanawat, weakest of the Aztec gods, sickly and covered in pimples, had been chosen to form a new world. There had already been 4 worlds, each set in motion by its own Lord Sun, and each, in turn, destroyed. The first by jaguars, the next by winds, the next by rains of fire, and the fourth by floods. To establish the 5th sun, Lord Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, had gone to the underworld and returned with the bones of earlier people, nourishing them with his own blood to create new life. But for them to have a world to live in, another god had to leap into the great bonfire and become the 5th sun. The Lord of Sustenance and the Lord of Fire had chosen Nanawat for this task, while the Lord of Rain and the Lord of the 4 quarters had picked their own offering, the proud, rich Texes Tecat. First, the chosen ones had to complete a 4-day fasting and bloodletting ritual. Nanawat had nothing but cactus thorns with which to bleed himself and fir branches to paint with his red offering, but he resolved to try his best. Meanwhile, Texes Tecat flaunted his riches, using magnificent jade spines and branches adorned with iridescent quetzal feathers for his own blood offering. When 4 days had passed, the fire was roaring high. 4 times proud, Texes Tecat approached the flames, and 4 times he pulled back in fear. Humble Nanawat stepped forward. The other gods painted him chalky white and glued feathers to him. Without hesitation, he threw himself into the flames. A fire-blackened eagle swooped over the fire, grabbed Nanawat, and carried him into the sky. There, Lord and Lady Sustenance bathed him, sat him on a feathered throne, and wrapped a red band around his head. Inspired by Nanawat, Texes Tecat threw himself into what was left of the fire, cooled ashes. A jaguar jumped over the fire pit, but couldn't carry Texes Tecat into the sky. When Texes Tecat reached the horizon, a band of goddesses dressed him in rags. Still, he shined just as brightly as Nanawat. But since he had shown far less bravery and much more pride, one of the gods picked up a rabbit and tossed it in his face, dimming his light.
And so that was actually one of the things that the myth explained was why there was a rabbit on the moon. So it explains how the sun came to be and also how the moon came to be, as well as why there's a rabbit on the moon. But yeah, so moving on, I think our Greek group is going to share a little bit about Greek mythology. Right now, we're going to try to do like a little bit of a summary of some of the big 3 mythologies, and we all did a little bit of research. We're going to talk about more of their specific elements in detail later on, but for now, I think it's important that we explain a couple of things about the big mythologies that probably people
Greek.
care about.
So there's gods, children of the Titans, like there's a lot more than just these ones with Zeus, Athena, Ares, Hades, Poseidon. There's the Titans, the children of the primordial beings. Also, there's more of these, but Kronos, Oceanus. Primordial beings are the original lads, Gaia and Uranus. So, there's there's 2 myths here that we're just going to summarize quickly.
You want to read Medusa and Perseus or Hades and Persephone?
I know you want to read Medusa and Perseus.
I really don't care.
There's Persephone, the goddess of seasons. So she was just kind of vibing, and she got kidnapped by Hades, and so there's this whole thing with pomegranates that if you eat them, you can go back to life, but only if you eat a full...
Wait, hold the phone. Persephone is important for a very specific reason. Persephone is the daughter of 2 different gods. Number 1 is Zeus, and number 2 is his sister,
Demeter.
Easier to find an email than to do this search.
Demeter. So Zeus had a child, Persephone. Persephone gets kidnapped by Hades, brings down to the afterlife, to the underworld, because Hades wanted her as a bride. So Ruthie, you can continue with what you were saying. I think it's important to point out who Persephone is.
Yeah. So anyway, there's this whole thing with pomegranates that
Did Chris get kicked again?
No, I'm coming
it's just
back.
a different
Okay.
Chris. Where if you eat an entire pomegranate, why is there an echo? If you eat an entire pomegranate, you can go back to, vibing. But if you only eat part of it, then you're trapped forever in the world of the dead. She only ate half of one because she's an idiot. And so then she was there married to Hades. They're vibing.
Yeah, but with a catch. She was only there half of the year.
Yeah.
For the other half of the year, she went back to the overworld.
Which created the seasons, the warm times.
Explain why the seasons existed in the end, because it created this for a specific reason.
Demeter was mad that Hades took Persephone away from her. So when she's in the underworld, she's depressed. But when Persephone is in the overworld, Demeter is happy, and you get spring and summer.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I guess Dimitri is now going to tell Medusa and Perseus.
All right. So Medusa and Perseus. Those of you who have read Percy Jackson, if I remember, Percy's real name was Perseus. And so Perseus was the son of Zeus, and he was the heir to his kingdom, but it was taken over. And he could only reclaim it if he killed Medusa. Now, nobody thought he could do this, so he summoned Athena's help. He got a really shiny shield, that basically just a mirror, and a good sword, right? So he goes to Medusa's hideout. Now, he slowly creeps up on her, while holding his shield and looking at her in her reflection. And once he gets right up behind her, he cuts her head off and brings it back home in a bag. And then he takes over his kingdom by killing everyone in power.
Okay, I think Fred is next.
The Norse were another civilization who were deeply involved in a unique mythology. They were based in Scandinavia during the Middle Ages and were people of warriors referred to as the Vikings, and known for their pillaging and attacks around Europe and the British Isles. Sorry, my mom was being weird. Have you heard any stories about the Vikings? Norse gods tended to reflect the chaotic and warlike nature of their people. The Norse believed in a lot of gods that were all woven into myths. Some major gods you've probably heard of include Odin, the Allfather and king of the Aesir gods. The sons of Odin are Thor and Loki, the gods of thunder and mischief. As the most well-known gods, you have most likely heard of these through reading myths or watching movies and reading books. Norse myths speak of 9 separate worlds, connected through the world tree, which is pronounced Yggdrasil. Norse mythology included a few different fates for the dead, like Valhalla or different places. And the Norse perception of the end of the world was Ragnarok, or the doom of the gods. And all of the evil things and the gods would fight, and then all the gods would die, and the world would be bad.
Next slide. It's my turn. I'm going to try to make this quick so that, we can still get out on time. I'm sorry. So Egyptian myths. Egyptian mythology is difficult to understand a lot of the time because even though all mythologies are obviously difficult to understand, ancient Egypt was an empire that lasted for a very long time. And because even though they had, papyrus and stuff, not many people knew how to read. So a lot of the time it was kind of word of mouth that was spreading these myths on. And so it gets confusing because it's like playing a game of telephone generation by generation for 3,000 years. So this caused a lot of information to change. Myths are read differently and said differently, and gods can just combine or change names or change roles, or completely just switch. which leaves an estimated about 2,000 deities that exist. Do you guys know any? Most Egyptian myths revolve around these deities. There's not a lot of there's not a lot of like gods involving with heroes. It's mostly between the gods a lot of the time. For people, the kind of religious expectation was that there was temples all around Egypt, and in your specific temple, you're meant to give up some of your stuff. For example, land. Give up land for the temples. Fish. You gotta give them fish and food and stuff.
Were blood
Or even
sacrifices common?
not as much, I don't think.
Aww.
You could also give gold. Here's a picture of Ra. We're gonna talk more about him.
Rasputin.
He's really annoying to learn about. I don't like him. He's so confusing. Most of the important gods are included in the Aeneid. We're gonna talk more about the Aeneid if we manage to get to week 3 of Pantheons.
The Iliad?
Which are the Aeneid. The Iliad is a epic for Greeks. The Aeneid is a group of 9 gods. The most important gods. I could have written more about them. I didn't though, because I just wanted to keep it brief. Here's Ra, also known as Re, Pra, Kefri, Atum, or Atum Ra. All gods of the sun, but they're different, mattering on the way you read them. I'm just gonna explain this real quick. Re and Pra are Ra, but they're just different spellings. Kefri and Atum are 2 different characters, and they are forms of Ra. You see, when the sun is rising, it's a beetle. That's Kefri. When the sun is going through the sky, I don't know why I'm pointing. It's Ra. And when the sun is setting, it's Atum, an old man. Sorry, I'm just trying to get in there. Interesting thing, Kefri is based off of a dung beetle, and it rolls the sun up the sky. Nut and Geb. 2 lovers, also related, divided by their parents that make Earth, Geb, and the sky, Nut. So they're 2. Nut is normally depicted like over Geb, and Geb is normally like up over, like under her. But they're separated. Osiris is the king of the dead. We're going to talk a little bit more about Osiris. He's a very important character. But he was one time cut up and killed by his jelly bro. And so he became the first mummy and became king of the dead. He was put back together by his sister wife. There's Set. He is that jelly bro who murdered his brother. He also murdered blind Horus. He's kind of a jerk. He's also the god of chaos. He has a dog head. Thoth. Not part of the Aeneid, just thought I'd mention him because he's fun. He is the god of wisdom and writing and papyrus and sometimes time. I only saw time once, but one of the stories involves Thoth being a ruler of time. It's confusing, man. He has a bird head. I think we have one last slide where I have a couple myth examples.
We do. I think.
Yes. Sorry.
Wait, where's the stock image?
Last slide for me. That is Isis up there. We're going to talk more about her. One of the most important myths is about Osiris and Isis. So after the creation of the world, it's confusing. Let's just say after the creation of the world, there was Osiris and Isis, okay? And they were part of the gods born into the Aeneid, okay? They were married. They were sister and a couple. And they basically Osiris was the teacher of the living world. He came down and he made all the stuff and he taught all the people. And Osiris and Isis were loved by all the people, and they were like the kings of the regular world, okay? And Set, that jelly bro, got totally jealous and held a banquet in which he had a big box, and he said, whoever fits in this box will get the box. And so everyone goes in the box, no one fits in it, until Osiris finally gets in the box, and he fits perfectly, and Set slams the door on him and throws him into the Nile River. I'm assuming you already knew this, but obviously with the Egyptians, the Nile River is very important for them. So he gets thrown into the Nile, and Isis works with her sister, who's married to Set, named Nephestis, I think, or Nephetis, I'm not exactly sure. And they turn into birds and they fly around. Eventually, they finally find Osiris. and Isis leaves to find. So I think, well, So I think Nephistus is hired to keep, to look after the body, to make sure Set doesn't do anything bad. But eventually, her husband Set comes back and is able to trick her, and is able to cut his brother into pieces. Ruthie, can you go to the next slide? I'm going to skip the Isis myth. Couple of things we need to say before we go. For one, we're wondering if you, well, we can skip that one, I guess. Second, you don't have to write a whole myth, but we'd like you to come away with, because we talked about the kind of the structure of a myth, we hope you can come away and write kind of a plot of a myth, like a general plot structure, maybe with a couple gods or with a hero like Perseus. But for now, just write like a plot of a myth, and I think we'll come back to it later when we're fleshing out myths later on in our thing. Hopefully we'll see everyone next week. Have a great week, and see you around, hopefully.
Good week, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.